Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today we're going to dive into something super cool. We're talking horror movies, but from a scientific angle.
Yeah. We're going to unpack the science behind those chills and thrills, those jump scares, and
Sure.
you know that feeling you get when you just can't look away from the screen even though you're like totally freaked out.
Right. So we're going to look at a bunch of research on this topic, a couple of studies, and some insights from scientists and psychologists who've really dug deep into why we love to be scared. Our mission, should we choose to accept it, is to figure out what's actually going on in our brains and bodies when we watch these horror flicks.
Exactly. So let's kick things off with a project that's been making some noise in the horror world. You familiar with the Science of Scare project?
I've heard of it. Isn't it the one where they hook people up to heart rate monitors and then make them watch a ton of scary movies?
Yeah. They're basically trying to figure out which horror movies get our hearts pumping the most. And their research has revealed some pretty interesting stuff. For example, the movie that consistently tops their list is Sinister.
Sinister. Okay, that makes sense. That movie is seriously creepy.
Right. Viewers' heart rates jumped a crazy 32% above their resting rate while watching that one.
32%. Wow. That's a pretty significant spike. But honestly, it's not just the super scary movies that get to me. It's those jump scares. You know, the ones that come out of nowhere and make you jump a mile. Why do those still work even though we know they're coming?
Well, it all comes down to our brain's wiring, and more specifically, this little almond-shaped part of our brain called the amygdala.
Amygdala. Sounds kind of scary already.
Well, it kind of is, at least when it comes to fear. See, the amygdala is basically our brain's fear center. It's constantly scanning our environment for potential threats, and when it detects something that could be dangerous, it triggers what's known as the fight or flight response.
So if I see a bear in the woods, my amygdala is going to freak out and tell me to run.
Exactly, and the same thing happens when we watch a horror movie. Even though we know, logically, that we're safe on the couch, our amygdala doesn't quite get the memo. Especially with those jump scares, it's like our brain is on autopilot, reacting before we even have time to think.
That actually makes a lot of sense. But I got to ask, is there actual scientific proof that this is happening?
There is. A study published in Current Biology actually pinpointed the amygdala's role in our fear response to things like jump scares. The researchers found that the amygdala lights up like a Christmas tree when we're exposed to sudden, unexpected threats, whether they're real or just on a screen.
So it's like our brains are getting a mini dose of that fight or flight response, even if it's just from watching a scary movie.
Right. And that's why we feel that surge of adrenaline, our heart races, our breathing gets faster. We're basically primed for action. But then, after the initial scare, our brain realizes there's no actual danger, right? And that's when we get this sense of relief, maybe even a bit of exhilaration or satisfaction.
Oh, okay. So that's why I kind of enjoy that heart in my throat feeling. Like I'm relieved it wasn't real, and I'm also kind of proud of myself for surviving the scare.
It's like a little victory for our survival instincts. But here's another interesting twist. It turns out jump scares aren't the only thing horror movies do to our brains.
There's more.
Oh yeah, there's more. Researchers have also used MRI scans to look at what happens in our brains when we're watching the entire horror movie, not just those jump scare moments.
And what did they find?
Well, get this. The brain areas that light up while watching horror movies are very similar to those that activate when we face real-life threats. We're talking about regions involved in attention, vigilance, and threat detection.
So it's like our brains are actually practicing survival skills, even if it's just in response to a movie.
It's kind of like that. These brain areas are constantly scanning for danger, assessing risks, and preparing us to react. So when we watch a horror movie, we're essentially giving those systems a workout, albeit in a controlled, fictional setting.
Okay, so I'm starting to see how this might not be entirely a bad thing. Maybe watching horror movies could have some unexpected benefits.
Exactly. Some researchers have suggested that horror can actually be therapeutic in a way, especially when it comes to managing anxiety.
Really? Explain that one to me.
Well, psychologist Colton Scrivener has done a lot of work on this. His theory is that watching horror movies offers us a safe space to confront our fears and anxieties. It's like exposure therapy, but for our minds. By facing our fears in a controlled environment, we might actually be building up our tolerance for stress and anxiety in real life.
That's really interesting. I've always wondered why I, kind of crave horror movies when I'm feeling stressed. Maybe it's my brain trying to tell me something.
It's possible. There's also research suggesting that people who are naturally more anxious tend to gravitate towards horror. It's like they're seeking out that controlled dose of fear and adrenaline as a way to cope with their anxiety.
Wow. So the next time someone judges me for my horror movie obsession, I can just tell them it's for my mental health.
Exactly. It's all about harnessing the power of fear for good. And hey, if nothing else, at least we're giving our brains a good workout while we're at it.
Absolutely. Well, this has been a fascinating deep dive. Who knew there was so much science behind our love of horror? It definitely makes you think twice about those scary movie nights.
It does, and it really highlights the incredible complexity of the human brain.
Thanks for joining us on this thrilling exploration. And hey, maybe the next time you feel a little stressed, a dose of horror might be just what the doctor ordered. Until next time, keep those brains buzzing and those hearts pumping.